rare photos. Regarded as the first photo ever taken, this image of a French countryside was achieved when Joseph Nicephore Niepce placed a thin coating of light-sensitive phosphorus derivative on a pewter plate and then placed the plate in a camera obscura and set it on a windowsill for a long exposure. Louis Hines photos such as this one of Breaker boys who picked pieces of slate from conveyor belt as freshly broken pieces of coal rolled by, helped raise support for child labor laws. Elizabeth Eckford's walk through a crowd of hateful tormentors into Little Rock Central High School in 1957 is a defining image of the tumultuous effort to desegregate schools. The image of U.S. Marines planting the American flag on Iwo Jima during World War II has been called the famous news photo of all time. In a defining image of the Vietnam War, the wounded Marine Gunnery Sergeant Jeremiah Purdy, center, with bandaged head, reached toward a stricken comrade after a fierce firefight south of the DMZ, October 1966. The Woodstock Music Festival that drew 500,000 people to an upstate New York farm in 1969 signified the best of that age's hopes and dreams. Michael Phelps went over Serbia's Milorad Čavić by 1/100th of a second at the 2008 Olympics was a golden example of the photo finish. Egged on by the bogus claims of the outgoing 44th president, a mob stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021 in an historic attempt to disrupt the tallying of Electoral College votes. The Hubble Space Telescope's photo known as Pillars of Creation captured the conditions in which new stars are born. A group of kids had arranged to care and feed the dog after the owner had died, England 1936. Jesse Owens breaking the world record 200-meter race at the 1936 Olympic Games of Berlin. The 3,000 men who helped build the Chase Manhattan Bank in New York City pose for a photo near the end of the constructional work, August 19, 1964. One of the first known photographs of Niagara Falls captured by British chemist Hugh Lee Pattinson in 1840, sits within a glass case at the National Gallery of Art. Mount St. Helens erupted 40 years ago today. The photo was taken by Richard Lasher, who did survive. Nobody knows what happened to the Pinto or the Yamaha. 19-year-old Shigeki Tanaka was a survivor of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, and he then went on to win the 1951 Boston Marathon. The crowd was silent. The return of a German soldier from Soviet captivity. He was taken to the war when his son was 1 year old. Germany. 1956. In 1941, Slovenian Albina Mali Hocevar joined the People's Liberation Movement at the age of 16. She was wounded twice as a resistance fighter at the age of 17. For the remainder of the war, she worked as a nurse. A farmer paints stripes on her cow to increase its visibility at night and prevent car accidents should it wander onto the road during blackout conditions. This is probably the most famous photograph of Józef Kudelka. Until 1968, the photographer did not photograph news events. Everything changed on the night of August 21. In the midst of the turmoil of the Soviet invasion, he took a series of photographs that were miraculously smuggled out of Czechoslovakia. In this image, his hand shows the time when Soviet tanks began to invade Prague. Unpacking the Statue of Liberty. New York City. 1885. The colossal assemblage of 350 neoclassical pieces, gifted by the people of France, took workers 4 months to put together. A woman tests a stroller intended to be resistant to gas attacks in Hextable, England in 1938, not long before the outbreak of World War II. Morning walk on the Brooklyn Bridge, New York, 1905. Young girl Kiowa Tribe, Oklahoma, 1894. U.S. cavalry soldiers pose in front of a sequoia in Yosemite known as Grizzly Giant, in 1900. This tree still stands today. Social distancing from 1953. A child with measles sits and eats alone during a coronation party in Chelsea, England. 2 widows gathered for Martin Luther King's funeral, April 1968. The 1927 Solvay Conference on Quantum Mechanics at the Institut International de Physique Solvay in Brussels, Belgium. This image features many of the greatest scientists in modern history. Some of those that you may recognize are Albert Einstein, Marie Curie, Max Planck, Niels Bohr, and Auguste Piccard. First cousins and royal Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, left, and King George V of the United Kingdom, right, photographed together wearing military uniforms in Berlin, Germany. The construction of the Manhattan Bridge on the East River in New York City. This photograph was taken on March 23, 1909. The bridge finished construction in 1909 and first opened up on the 31st of December 1909. An injured Soviet prisoner of war, POW, dressed in new clothes near the Arctic Circle in Rovaniemi, Finland, during the Winter War on 6 January 1940. Dr. Werner von Braun, an aerospace engineer that was a leading figure in Nazi German rocket technology, and then United States rocket technology, photographed standing in front of 5 F-1 rocket engines in circa 1969. Joseph Stalin, left, Franklin D. Roosevelt, center, and Winston Churchill, right, on the veranda of the Soviet legation in Tehran, during the conference, in November 1943. Rosa Parks being fingerprinted by Lieutenant D.H. Lackey as one of the people indicted as leaders of the Montgomery bus boycott on February 22, 1956. She was one of 73 people rounded up by deputies that day after a grand jury charged 113 African Americans for organizing the boycott. A photograph of the Boulevard du Temple in Paris, France in 1838. It was taken by Louis Daguerre and shows a person having his boots polished near the bottom left of the photograph. It is believed to be the earliest image to show a living person. The final photograph taken of Vladimir Lenin. He is seen with his sister Anna Ilyinitna Yelizarova Ulyanova and his doctor A.M. Koshevnikov in Gorky in May 1923. A photograph on the USS Bunker Hill aircraft carrier after it was hit by 2 kamikazes within 30 seconds on the 11th of May 1945 off of Kyushu, Japan. 372 died and 264 were wounded. Suffragette leader Emmeline Pankhurst being carried away from Buckingham Palace in London, England after being arrested while trying to present a petition to King George V of the United Kingdom, 21st of May 1914. The famous photograph The Valley of the Shadow of Death taken on 23 April 1855 by Roger Fenton during the Crimean War. This war was the first that was documented with photographs. Former President, then Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, William Howard Taft, administering the oath of office to 31st U.S. President Herbert Hoover on the East Portico of the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. on March 4, 1929. The completed head of the Statue of Liberty on display at the 3rd Paris World Fair, Exposition Universelle, in Paris, France in 1878. Sergeant Stubby, the most decorated dog of World War I, photographed wearing his military uniform and badges in circa 1920. Martin Luther King Jr. photographed among a crowd during the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom on August 28, 1963. At this event, MLK delivered his famous I Have a Dream speech. One of the most famous photos in history, lunch atop a skyscraper, was taken on the 20th of September 1932 and shows workers enjoying lunch while sitting on a steel beam in Manhattan, New York City during the construction of the Rockefeller Center. Geologist Thomas Griffith Taylor and meteorologist Charles Wright photographed on the January 5, 1911 at the entrance of a grotto in the side of an iceberg with the Terra Nova ship in the background. This was a part of the British Antarctic expedition led by Captain Robert Falcon Scott, which lasted from 1910 to 1913. A Bedouin warrior, a nomadic Arab people who have historically inhabited the desert regions in North Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, Iraq, and the Levant, photographed in Jerusalem in 1900. The most monarchs photographed together in history, they were together at Windsor Castle in England for the funeral of King Edward VII of the United Kingdom on May 20, 1910. Standing, from left to right, Haakon VII of Norway, Ferdinand of Bulgaria, Manuel II of Portugal, Wilhelm II of Germany, George I of Greece, and Albert I of Belgium. Seated, from left to right, Alfonso XIII of Spain, George V of the United Kingdom, and Frederick VIII of Denmark. Citizens of Antwerp, Belgium, coming out on the streets, a few hours after the announcement of the armistice, to celebrate the end of the First World War. This historical photograph was taken on November 11, 1918. Thanks for watching. Subscribe.